I just wrapped a first video talking in broad brushstrokes about what's wrong with Ikenna's language learning program for how you can supposedly learn any language in 6 months, including Chinese. And I thought I'd get right back on the microphone now and record a second video challenging myself to move into more specific details. I have indeed changed clothes. I got into my gym wear. After this, I'm going straight to the gym to lift weights, do push-ups, so on and so forth. However, I'm neither studying Chinese as intensively as I did back when I was living in that school in Kunming, nor am I lifting weights at the gym as intensively. So yeah, my life has gotten worse in many ways. These are just two examples. All right, so Ikenna's advice, more precisely, what's wrong with it? I think what's interesting is that the same broad thematic concerns in the first video are here going to be repeated. And one of those is questioning what we really mean by encouragement or motivation. It's very easy to treat sophisticated meanings in a simplistic way when the terms we use are so familiar. Encouragement, motivation. Some of the best results of any language teaching methods in the world show up from the United States Diplomatic Corps. You can buy the materials, you can see the methods, you can see the textbooks they use, you can find out what they do in the classroom. I just ended the last video by saying everyone wants to sell you a bottle telling you this contains the secret, but the truth is there is no secret. If you look into what the United States Diplomatic Corps is doing right in teaching languages, guess what? There is no secret. The type of person who signs up for that course, the type of person who has been offered a job paying more than $100,000 a year in the Diplomatic Corps. That kind of person comes to class unbelievably motivated, unbelievably disciplined, focused on learning that language. You could use the worst language teaching methods in the world and still get great results with the United States Diplomatic Corps because of the type of people who are there to learn language, their motivation coming into the classroom, and what they've been promised as the product at the end of that class, right? So who gets recruited into Diplomatic Corps? Middle-aged people. They often have a career in law already. There's something like a trained lawyer, something unrelated to language. They have some kind of background in government bureaucracy, and they've been offered the opportunity of a lifetime. Hey, if you come to class, if you buckle down and hit the books, if you work really hard to learn Chinese, we're going to give you this incredibly high-paying, prestigious job in China, and then this is what you're going to do probably within the next 10 years of your life. Probably you're set for life. Probably this is going to pay for your retirement. This is the financial incentive alone is tremendous, but there are also elements of personal prestige, ego, so on and so forth. So those students are showing up with a level of focus, dedication, motivation, encouragement that cannot be compared to a normal university student who signs up for an intro to Chinese language class not really knowing what they're signing up for, probably not really knowing what they want out of life, and you definitely not bringing that kind of background in terms of really focused hard work, sitting down with pen and paper, right? So this one thing, when you really get into what we mean by motivation and encouragement, you're looking at something that can't be reproduced. It's something I can't sell you, right? It's something I can't give you on YouTube. It's something I can't sell you in an ebook. It's not a commodity, right? But on the other hand, it completely trumps, sorry to use that verb in the year 2020, it trumps, it outshines the significance of the language learning methods you're using. Now, the other problem is, when you use bad methods, it will then erode the motivation that people have. It will be discouraging for them. So Ikenna specifically encourages you to start with the Pimsleur course. That's really the main piece of advice he has, is for you to work alone, self-study in isolation using the Pimsleur method, right? And then we're not tracking the number of successes. We're not tracking the number of failures. He's just going to present you with emails he's received from people who are happy with the course. Emails people said, hey, this worked great. I learned the language in 6 months, right? This is inherently misleading. We are left to imagine what percentage of people buy the book, watch the YouTube video, follow this advice, they get discouraged and stop. Or they fail, or they work really hard for the 6 months they still have no listening comprehension of Chinese. They can't understand what someone says when they speak to them in Chinese, which is very common, right? The Pimsleur method for Chinese specifically is absolutely terrible. And I would go further. The Pimsleur method for Chinese is especially terrible if you're at level 1 or level 0. If you're already like an intermediate student and you want to review, you want to refresh your memory by going back and listening to those simpler dialogues in Pimsleur, that's okay. But in terms of learning, all right, with Chinese, you can't tell from the word form whether the word is a noun or a verb or a subject or an object, right? You just get one syllable to work with most of the time. Sometimes you get 2 syllables, okay? You can't pick up intuitively, as an English speaker, the parts of the sentence, the correct word order, or the syntax, the implicit relationship between the words by listening through repetition to a Pimsleur tape. Now, how useful is Pimsleur for learning German or French or Italian? I've got to tell you, I'm also very skeptical about that. But with Chinese, from day one, you must have the accurate spelling in pinyin. You must know how to spell the word phonetically in the artificial system of phonetics that Chinese has. And you must get familiar with the non-phonetic ideographic written form from day one. Otherwise, there are going to be 2 different words that sound like dai, D-A-I, and you won't know which is which. There are going to be 2 different words that sound like Dao, and you don't realize they're 2 different words. For you, just listening to Pimsleur, you think they're the same word. And you're going to hear words in different parts of the sentence, and you're not going to know the role that word is playing. So the main piece of advice he offers you for learning a language in 6 months is absolutely terrible for Chinese. I would also say it's terrible for any really difficult language like Cree, Ojibwe, Laotian, Cambodian, Japanese. I'd say it's terrible advice for. And if it is okay advice, if it's just not terrible, if it's mediocre advice for a language like Italian or German, I would say even so, that's only because your own motivation is so great that it is outshining, that it is trumping what's basically a bad method for language acquisition, for language learning. Encouragement and discouragement. What we're talking about here, and implicitly what all of the YouTube gurus are profiting from, is just how discouraging it is to study a language alone. All right? You can be wrong about something and make the same error again and again, and there's nobody there to encourage you. You can try your hardest to write something on the internet in Chinese, and people ridicule you, and people are cruel to you, and people are discouraging. You can be in a university program. I told an anecdote about that already. And you go to class, and the teacher treats you like crap. Who has the motivation? Who has the encouragement to sit at a desk alone, to really study a language in isolation, when language itself, by its very nature, is social, and when the refinement and correction of language requires these sorts of social relationships? So he makes a big deal out of this. Ikenna claims that the fundamental method of language learning as a child is just to talk and then have a parent lovingly correct you, right? Parents say, oh no, you say it this way. Oh, you have the words the wrong way. No, your and your are 2 different words, this kind of thing. Okay. Do you have a relationship with somebody like that in your life to teach you Chinese? If you're learning Chinese, do you have someone who will act like a grandparent to you, correcting you, encouraging you, helping you in this way? And if so, for how many hours a day? Okay? So it's fine to offer this observation in theory, right? Like, oh, well, this is the natural way to learn a language, is to do this like a child with a parent. Okay? Can you employ someone to move into your apartment and practice Chinese with you, and to do it in this, assiduous way, noticing the errors you're making? Maybe they're taking notes and saying, okay, there are 2 different words that sound like Dao, and I can tell you don't know the difference between them. Okay, there are 2 different words that sound like die. Oh no, in that sentence, it's not this die, it's the other die. And then go through it with you this way. Can you employ someone to live with you and act this way? And even if you could, we were talking about 6 months here. After 5 years of this kind of passive, parental, loving language learning, you would be lucky if you could speak that language at the same level as a 5-year-old. Okay, it takes 5-year-old children 5 years to get to that level and be a lisping, incoherent 5-year-old, and that's not what you want. Okay, after 6 months studying Chinese, I was able to write articles that got published in newspapers in Chinese. My ability in language is really limited. My vocabulary is really limited. Really, really limited. But within those limits, I could write an article that was good enough to be published by newspapers without any corrections. They didn't change it. They didn't even change the title. They didn't fix. There was not a single error in it that got corrected. And I still do that now once in a while. I wrote an article a couple weeks ago in Chinese that got published in a newspaper. Pretty silly article. And, obviously I use a dictionary to look up the words I don't know. I'm not saying it's easy for me, but as a language exercise, I can do that at that level. There is no 5-year-old child who can do that. So if you're being honest with yourself about the outcomes you want, and then the methods and the sacrifices you're going to have to make to get there, probably you're now looking over at the United States Diplomatic Corps. You're probably looking at the methods they're using. You're probably looking at the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, or U.S. military. You're probably looking at some of these super intensive, super exhausting methods of language learning and saying, okay, could I do this for 6 months? I mean, the method I used, I described as being in some ways like the military and in some ways like living in a Buddhist monastery. It is what it is. And then again, implicitly and tacitly, it's going to come down to a question of motivation and encouragement. Are you just going to experience this process of language learning as denigrating, discouraging, and disheartening? Or are you going to have a positive attitude to it? Now, some people might have this kind of optimistic, sunny attitude where they can listen to the Pimsleur tapes, memorize a bunch of stuff completely wrong, like with very low levels of accuracy. Just, oh, yeah, this is fun. I'm learning these phrases. And there are all these little traps in Chinese where it's like, oh no, you can use that verb positively, but you can't use it negatively. Oh yeah, that verb, in order to make it transitive, you have to add this word to the sentence. But then if you use a different verb, then it doesn't work like that at all. The idiom, the syntax, the grammar isn't like that. Okay, I'll give you an example. 我告诉你, I told you. 我对你说明, I explained it to you. Okay, you had a dui in one, but not the other. Okay, this is easy, all right? There are just these patterns and rules and exceptions to the rules. It's all idiom all the time. There's absolutely no way you're even going to notice those problems working from Pimsleur. So if you just are like a sunny, optimistic, happy person who says, this is great, I'm just going to memorize this stuff from this language tape, without even having accuracy about the difference between like can and can, right? That's hard to get from audio only, right? There are going to be things you get wrong phonetically, probably shao and xiao and, this kind of thing. The different S sounds and what have you. There are going to be a lot you get wrong, even phonetically, because you're not learning the pinyin. You're going to have no idea what the written characters are. They're going to be, I guess I can say homonyms. They're going to be words that sound similar or sound the same, where you think they're the same word and they're not. They're 2 or 3 different words. A great example is duh. Just DE. How many words are there that sound like duh? And you really need to memorize which one is which, and you need to know it orthographically, not just phonetically. Okay, but there are some people who are so optimistic and so positively motivated that they could just memorize this crap with 0 accuracy and then speak Chinese completely incomprehensible, with 0 comprehensibility to native Chinese people. They would come out of that talking Chinese in a manner where native Chinese speakers have no clue what you're saying. They just sit there, what? And then flip it around, vice versa. When they listen to a native speaker talking, it turns out in real life, Chinese people don't talk the way people do in the Pimsleur tapes at all. And again, in terms of idiom, where you're only able to understand exactly the verb you learned before and only understand it when it's used with the idiom or the sentence pattern that you're familiar with. Like, they took that verb, but now they're using it with a passive voice construction in Chinese, and now it's incomprehensible to you. Or now when you hear the sentence, you don't even know which word is the verb and which word is the noun, because in Chinese they all sound the same, and you can't guess from the position in the sentence because of these myriad idioms or sentence patterns, okay? I'm getting the point across here that Chinese is really, really hard with or without Ikenna's miracle method, without his advice. But if you are so optimistic and sunny and positive a character, if you have that motivation, right, then my point is here, the outcomes will be even worse for you, right? Because you'll be mislearning the language, okay? That actually the people who get pissed off and frustrated and discouraged, in a sense, they're the lucky ones, right? They're the ones who say, hey, this is a broken tool, this is a bad method, this is a waste of my time, I'm not learning the language accurately, I'm putting myself back instead of forwards, so forget it, I quit. If you measure them, a very, very large percentage of people using this kind of method, they're going to fail. But what they may not realize is they're better off than the people who are so optimistic and so deluded that they think they're succeeding when in fact they're setting themselves back by years because they're inculcating bad language habits, just artificial, textbook, broken use of the language that they're going to have to undo and relearn. They're going to have to go back to scratch. They're going to have to throw that all away, which is very, very hard to do. I mentioned this on my channel once before. I knew an old man, I think he was more than 60. He was a white man who had lived in Thailand for many years. Let's say he had lived in Thailand for 30 years. And he had language errors. He never learned the written script. So this is very similar to doing Pimsleur method. He only learned through speech. He only learned in this so-called organic method from talking to people. He didn't know when a word had a double T, like a double consonant sound, or just one consonant, right? Because you can't hear that in the Thai language. You also can't hear it in English most of the time. The word batter in English, are there two T's or is there one T? Well, if English isn't your first language, it's hard to guess just from hearing, So these kinds of distinctions, he completely lacked. He had no idea about elements of meaning that were written into the words. He didn't know word boundaries. So there could be a phonetic component, which is actually the ending of one word, and he thinks it's the beginning of the next word. I saw this guy speaking the language fluently, but with zero accuracy. I saw him standing around with a bunch of construction workers, and one of the construction workers came up to him as a female construction worker on the construction site. And this female construction worker says to him in Thai, she says, hey, my husband dumped me, so you and I, we can get together, we can be a couple now. And he replied in Thai, and all the construction workers broke out laughing. He replied in Thai, oh, service no good? That was what he said in Thai. Like, did your husband leave you because you're no good at cleaning up the apartment or something? He said it in three words. And they're all these construction workers, they're her colleagues, and they're all falling over laughing. They thought this was so funny, right? So, the guy could communicate in the language. But, one of the most astounding language errors he made, that was, to me, I kept saying to him, no, this isn't correct. There were basic nouns that he had misapprehended and memorized with the wrong meaning. The name of a city versus a word meaning the mayor's office. He thought the mayor's office was the name of the city and vice versa. I guess I won't get into more detail. So it's very misleading to think that the only problem is learning a language or not learning a language, like fluency or lack of fluency. What's more dangerous is false fluency. What's more dangerous is the illusion of having confidence and ability and understanding in a language when you don't. Learning a language in an inaccurate and sloppy way, it's like if you're a tailor, you do a bad job stitching something up, and then you got to go back and tear it apart and put all the pieces back together again. Okay? Ikenna's advice, in short, I think it's terrible. The only thing I can say about the guy positively is, obviously there are people who watch these videos and think, wow, if he can do it, I can do it. They feel some kind of positive encouragement, and maybe in a sense, that's a beautiful thing.